to this early morning ILA e-coffee chat. This is already the fifth e-coffee that is taking place. Most were on the theme of COVID-19, this one also. I believe that most of you must be familiar with ILA. ILA is the Luxembourg Institute of Directors. It aims to promote best practices in the field of corporate governance. My name is Fernand Grolms. I'm an independent director and also a member of the ILA Management Committee. Our subject today is business risk, continuity and protection, thoughts for boards on COVID-19. We will actually deal with three sub-themes. The first being ICAP and ORSA, which are the risk models for banks and insurance companies. Then we have a second item that we are going to deal with, business continuity plans. And then last but not least, we will cover a couple of aspects on insurance coverage. We have planned an information session of 1 hour. We will try to stick to it as good as we can. And this session will also be recorded and it will be made available by ILA later on. The participants can ask questions. Please do it via the chat. You will be put on mute. And please also stay on mute to increase the quality of the session. So without further ado, let me now start with presenting my panelists of today. So for the first part, ICAP and ORSA, we have the pleasure to welcome Jean-Philippe Peters and Thierry Flamand, both from Deloitte. Jean-Philippe is a partner at Deloitte Luxembourg, where he leads the risk advisory practice. He has more than 17 years of experience in different risk and compliance areas of financial institutions, and with a specific expertise on prudential matters and regulatory capital requirements. Thierry is sort of the guru in actuarial science and actuarial services. He works more than 25 years now in actuarial services for insurance companies and pension funds. And he has local and international expertise on regulatory matters and requirements. Then on the session that comes immediately after, business continuity plans, we have the pleasure to welcome Anne-Sophie Minaldo and Laurent de la Fessière, both from KPMG. Anne-Sophie is a partner at KPMG. She is the head of regulatory for Luxembourg. So she makes sure that KPMG's regulatory experts take into the account compliance and business related impacts that new regulations can have. She is working with a team of more than 40 people, and she covers banking, investment management, insurance, and forensic work. Laurent, he is an associate partner in KPMG, and he oversees the team in charge of IT auditing and technology risk advisory. Laurent has more than 19 years of experience in Luxembourg and Canada. He is also very knowledgeable in cybersecurity and IT regulatory affairs. And then last but not least, on the insurance side, we have the pleasure to welcome Philippe Gouttière. Philippe is the managing partner of Arbil. Arbil is an insurance brokerage company dedicated to corporate insurance that Philippe co-founded 3 years ago. He's also a conducting officer, dirigeant agréé of a reinsurance captive company, and member of the ILA working group on insurance. So that brings us immediately to the first session dedicated to ICAP and ORSA. So Thierry, Jean-Philippe, I think many of us are familiar with what ICAP and ORSA is. But what is special about ORSA and ICAP this year in the situation of COVID-19? I think, Thierry, you are going to launch us with talking on the ORSA first. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Fernand. Generally speaking, the COVID-19 impacts are directly linked to the business mix of an insurance or reinsurance undertaking. A life insurance undertaking will not be impacted as a non-life insurance undertaking or a reinsurance undertaking. Nevertheless, there are common impacts, in particular the direct impact linked to the financial crisis and the economic slowdown. Concerning the ORSA framework, there are 6 main components that should be impacted by the COVID-19. The risk review process, I can tell you that in no ORSA, I have never seen in any ORSA, the pandemic risk is a major risk. Then probably the risk has been underestimated. The solvency and capital assessment, it's the cornerstone of the ORSA. The business planning, of course, the capital planning linked to the business planning. The documentation, you know, as member of the board of some insurance or reinsurance undertakings, the ORSA must be always submitted to the board and sent to the regulator. And at the end, the governance of the ORSA. If we go to the next slide, the main impacts of the insurance industry are described in the different buckets. In fact, the financial crisis correlated to the COVID-19 will impact, of course, the non-life, the life, and the reinsurance industry. It's probably the major impact on the life insurance industry. In reality, the mortality the mortality is not shouldn't really impact the balance sheet, the economic balance sheet of a life insurance company. But unrealized gain on bonds and equity portfolio has been drastically reduced, generating already some capital injection. A lot of life insurance groups in France, but some in Luxembourg as well, have already injected more capital or postponed dividend payments. The second key impact is the economic slowdown that will create some credit risk and a reduction of the gross premium written for the business directly linked to the volume of trade. As you know, the insurance activity is always everywhere in the economy. Transport, credit, travel, loans, and for health, life and health, of course, the business is directly linked to the layoff. First bucket. I will not talk a lot about the operational risk generated by the COVID-19. Nevertheless, in the direct function, it's clear that the customer service capability will be impacted as well. And we expect a slowdown of the claims notification that will be followed by a congestion. And we expect, of course, some operational risk linked to the remote work. If you follow the international press, you will see a lot of debate about the coverage of pandemic.
Just a small question, Thierry, can I interrupt you for 1 second? There is one participant asking, where can we see the slides? I'm not sure, Melanie, if we can handle that or not. I don't see them either. But Thierry, just go on, please. Okay.
I don't have access, then I have the slide in front of me. If you follow the international press, as I said, you will see a lot of debate around the pandemic. In fact, the COVID-19 has a very positive impact on loss ratio as well as negative impact according to the line of business. In fact, we are not in a black or white situation. We are in a gray area. The consequence of the positive impact is the temptation of some states to transfer a part of the burden of the crisis to the insurance industry, even if the risk was not really covered. You have seen some initiatives in Luxembourg, but also in France, for instance, to set up a fund that should be used to compensate some losses due to the COVID-19. But this fund, it's a pure initiative of the market. It's not linked to insurance coverage. Due to the uncertainties of the impact on the insurance industry, the EIOPA, the European regulator, has given some guidelines to the local supervisor to increase the scrutiny of the insurers, in particular in terms of this dividend distribution. We have seen in Ireland, for instance, the regulator asking to a pure unit-linked company to avoid to pay any dividend. Of course, COVID-19 will have a huge impact on some strategic projects like M&A projects, transformation projects that will be cancelled or postponed. Next slide, please.
Have we seen the Luxembourg regulator already say something on dividend payments?
The CEA took the EIOPA guideline and put it on its website. That's it. But nothing else.
Okay, thank you. Please move on.
The approach of the CEA is always to more or less to apply the guideline proposed by the EIOPA.
Okay, great.
Of course, behind an ORSA, there is always an ORSA policy. And the ORSA policy should define the triggers in order to launch a specific or an ad hoc ORSA. It means to relaunch the ORSA process. I'm sure that the impact described before have already activated some triggers. In the last slide, I wanted to allocate the key triggers to the specific component of the ORSA. I will not describe all the triggers and all the impacts, but I will take only two key triggers. In this situation, in fact, you can see that the COVID-19 activated several triggers at the same time. For instance, adverse movement in the financial markets. In life, for instance, the evaporation of the capital gains will probably require the recalculation of the profit-sharing allocation, and the reduction of the profit-sharing allocation will automatically increase the adjustment of the basic solvency capital requirement, and so will increase the solvency capital requirement. Then, automatically, we will impact the solvency and the capital assessment, the capital planning. The risk profile may change because the asset allocation will be impacted by the depreciation, and of course it may impact the governance as well. The risk appetite will be probably reviewed. Commercial development slowdown. In non-life and life, the economic slowdown will probably reduce the gross premium return in the coming months. If the economy recovers at moderate speed, the business plan should be impacted and the capital planning as well. I could continue during 1 hour, but I think I need to leave you for some time for the Q&A and for the other speaker. Fernand, if you have any question.
Yeah, no, I have no question at this point of time. I just sent a message to all the participants if they have questions that they bring them up through the chat. So maybe over the next 5 minutes, we will get questions. And I suggest that meanwhile, we pass over to Jean-Philippe to tell us about the specifics of ICAP. I think there are a couple of similarities already on the asset side of the balance sheet. But Jean-Philippe, up to you now. What is special about ICAP this year? Jean-Philippe? I don't see him.
I think he has been deconnected.
Oh my God. Okay. So that's quite a challenge of the moderator. He has to decide now what we do. So I guess that, so we hope that Jean-Philippe will be able to connect instantly. And I think the best is probably then to move on with the next theme, which is business continuity plans, where we have Anne-Sophie and Laurent. We had a preparatory discussion, and we discovered that there are probably two main aspects to be covered, the one being IT more properly, and the other one being linked to people. And I think Laurent is going to talk about IT and Sophie more about the people aspect. How are you going to proceed? Who will start? Is it Anne-Sophie or is it Laurent?
Thank you, Fernand.
Yeah, Laurent will start setting the scene and I will step in afterwards. Laurent?
Thank you. To briefly set the scene, Business Continuity Management is an all-enterprise initiative which comprises not only BCPs, but crisis and emergency management, which typically involves senior management, business continuity planning, involving the business continuity in charge as well as all of the business units of the organization, IT disaster recovery management, involving information technology, and third-party risk, involving the business continuity person in charge, procurement, and or the business units. Obviously, this is normally underpinned by governance and program management. In the financial sector, there is often an explicit regulatory mandate for board members to address business continuity through the issuance of guiding principles or through the challenging of the internal governance arrangements. In the EU, business continuity has been subject to an increased regulatory focus in the recent months along information technology and cybersecurity topics. As an example of this regulatory focus, business continuity is a major point of the CSSF weekly questionnaire that investment fund managers have to fill in since a couple of weeks. Most business continuity plans were based on the central assumption that an organization's main offices would be unavailable and that critical teams would relocate their work from backup offices like those provided by EBRC or Sunguard. Obviously, in this COVID-19 context, this does not work well, where work rather needs to take place from home. The major difficulties we have observed in the market to enable working from home have been around the lack of remote access facility. The regulator has been historically conservative on this topic and shifted, and thus a number of organizations were faced with the challenge to deploy very quickly new technologies to support remote access like VPN, VDI, Teams, Zooms, etc. The second challenge we have observed is the lack of digitalization in the processes. It's very nice to be able to work from home, but if many of your critical processes still rely on paper, it's a very big challenge to make this working from home. In this context, it is time to draw some lessons on what worked well and less well with your organization's business continuity arrangements, challenge that the reality is properly backed up, and amend the BCP and related guidance accordingly. Anne-Sophie will further develop some of the attention points which should be dealt with in the short term.
Yes, thank you, Laurent. So as Laurent mentioned, I have never seen a business continuity planning forcing working from home massively. Therefore, as it has never been considered as an option, it's true to say that the practicalities have been invented, created over the last few weeks. Therefore, I can only encourage the board members attending this e-coffee to verify that the guidance, the guiding principles, the policies and programs are put up to date to ensure that you are guiding together with the management of your entities the people on the ground, because there are plenty of decisions that may have been taken on a case-by-case basis to deal with critical situation, to guarantee the continuity of your critical operations. But now it's time to consider that the situation we are all in may be the new norm, still for a few weeks, hopefully, not for a few months. Nevertheless, it's important that you take a bit of an overview, you step back and you ensure that your principles, your programs, and more specifically, I will come to that, your controls are still operating properly. So it's time really to ensure that the reality you are in is properly backed up by your guiding principles, programs, and processes. Now I would like to talk about the people. It's very important to stay connected with your people to ensure that the teams are effectively operating as you imagine. The CSSF and also other EU regulators are starting to talk about ethics, code of conduct, because it's of utmost importance that you can trust your people. You have less capacity to oversee them. So team managers are connecting through email, calls, Teams, Skype, but it's not exactly the same as sharing the same office. So it's important that you interact with the staff to ensure, to make them aware that you trust them, and that if you don't want to face an increase of your operational losses, it's really based on the quality of their work, so the professionalism they will demonstrate and their engagement. So maintaining the connection and trusting your people is key for your operations to be sustainable and to be properly executed. And now I would like to move to another element, which is the controls framework. So if you are leading regulated entities, you know how important it is to apply a 3 lines of defense model. Today, your first line is working from home. Therefore, they may have plenty of controls that are less evident than before. I do not say that they are not executed, but it may be more difficult for the people to evidence the controls they are operating. It may therefore create an issue for the second line of defense to control what's going on. And last but not least, the third line, the internal auditors, may be in trouble in few months when they will try to verify that the controls have properly been executed. So for those entities that are producing ISAE reports, those reports that are usually very useful to reassure your clients, should start considering how you document the controls, how you ensure that the ISAE report in few months down the street will be signed off. So it's really important that you consider the materializations of control and how you replace the evidence that you were used to have before. So I really encourage all of you to think about that. And last but not least, it will be my last point for this session. It may be easiest working from home for operating normal business, I would say, executing trades, settling transactions, processing standard operations. However, when it comes to strategic thinking, when it comes to getting organized, stay in touch with your clients, developing your business, it may be a bit more difficult. We as Big Four, we are currently facing this situation, attracting new opportunities, interacting with our clients, putting a lot of empathy and active listening while we are connected only through technology is much more difficult. So now it's time for you, being board members, you are as well responsible for the long-term sustainability of your companies. So it's important that you find your way to maintain this brainstorming, this strategic thinking, and to ensure that you measure the impact of the situation to the business, and you put proper actions in place to support your sales force and to give the energy and show the way to your people. So quite a challenging situation without talking about cyber risk, but Laurent will conclude with that last point. We keep for the end because it's important that your company are as well protected from fraud, and fraud those days may come from a number of different angles. So Laurent, maybe you can conclude these sessions by talking about cyber risk and the fraud-related element.
Sure, thanks. In these troubled and stressful times, organized criminal groups have clearly pivoted, shifted to COVID-19 lures in order to trick people in clicking on malicious links or phishing their credentials. We have also seen an increase in scanning of devices exposed to the internet in order to detect technical vulnerabilities which may exist in old or newly deployed equipment, like those which have been deployed to support new work from home arrangements. This is often used as entry points into penetrating, hacking the organization, and later deploying more advanced fraudulent schemes like ransomware to block the information systems and extort some money from the organization. Very unfortunately, we have seen that the organized criminal groups have been ruthless in the selection of their targets. We've seen many actors in the health sector, like hospitals, testing labs, to be targeted in the recent weeks. And there is, in general, increased attack activity around cybersecurity. So in this context, it's very important to make sure that the equipment exposed to the internet is properly secured. As we mentioned, a lot of organizations had to deploy very quickly, potentially bypassing a number of normal control steps, equipment to support work from home. So it's important to challenge that this equipment has been properly tested from a security standpoint, that it adheres to the information security policy of the organization, and that eventually all these arrangements comply with the regulations of the CSSF on work from home. It is also very important to raise the awareness of staff. As I mentioned, the attackers have been pivoting to COVID-19 lures. I've personally seen some very intelligent people falling to such lures and attacks. It's not a matter of intelligence, but simply in the stress of a normal day. And I think we can all agree that stress is increased in these times. It's very quick to click on something you should not have clicked on. And unfortunately, you cannot undo that. So raising the awareness of staff on the current threat landscape is very important. So a lot of the attacks we have seen can be very well crafted, pretending some emergency Zoom meetings, impersonating some major brands to trick people into clicking or providing their credentials. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Laurent. Anne-Sophie, so from a governance point of view, what should board members do now? Should they invite the management to organize a board session, a brainstorming session on lessons learned from the recent experience, and then discuss together what needs to be changed in the business continuity plan? Would that be a good move?
Yeah, Fernand, you are perfectly right. Honestly, I think that we even get the question from one of the participants in advance, where a participant was questioning whether boards have to assess the impact of COVID-19 on their business. And my answer is yes, obviously. Measuring the impact, readjusting the strategy, and more importantly, taking care of taking the time to analyze the lessons learned and to adapt the company structure and process is of utmost importance. So now I will really expect that boards are meeting sooner than later to reassess the situation, because we were in a situation where we all expect it will be 2 to 3 weeks. Well, remember mid-March when we were put from home, we say, okay, early April we'll be back, and then it was, oh no, it will be after the Easter holiday, and now we are talking early June. So I think it's important to now document, think, and reassess, readjust the organization.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we can also ask Philip if he has an additional remark on this. When we talk about the business continuity plans, are there insurances also in that area? I'm thinking, for example, about cybersecurity, but there may be other aspects. Is there anything that you would like to add, Philip?
Yes, thank you, Fernand. I think that the remarks from Anne-Sophie and Laurent on BCP are very useful. But nevertheless, even with the best BCP, you could see a drop in your income, and you still have to pay your permanent fixed cost. And so you could think about using your business interruption insurance to get coverage. But it is unlikely to work. In France, they assess that maximum 10% of the companies insured for business interruption will have a coverage for COVID-19 claims. Why? Because those business interruptions insurance policies are connected to the property insurance, or the fire insurance, and they will pay if there is a covered loss, so meaning a fire or water damage or whatever. But generally speaking, viruses or pandemics are either not covered or excluded. So there are some insurance companies who promise to pay in France in application to their wording, but normally there is no coverage. And in Luxembourg, I did not hear about coverage solutions. Having said that, it's also normal. Why? Because insurance based, all the business is based on risk mutualization. But if everybody is hit on the same time for the same thing, if the insurer cover this, they will go bankrupt. So maybe there are solutions which could come because the insurers demonstrated for decades that they are able to pay large losses for natural catastrophe, for instance. And so there are discussions about that. But nowadays, it's not covered and it's not included in the current pricing. So we'll see. The insurance universe is very large, but I think that I will focus on just a couple of insurance policies. And so the cyber, as you suggested, is very important nowadays because of the reliance on technology and the dependence of our companies. And in that case, the COVID-19 is not changing the situation, because the cyber insurance policies don't care about where people are working from, but they are focused on the IT network system definition. And most of the insurance policies will include clouds. They will include the bring your own device policy from the companies. So if your employees use their own hardware to access the corporate system, it will be also covered in most of the insurance wording. So that's not a major issue. Nevertheless, you still need to be able to provide the same level of security that you promised or that you explained to the insurer when you took the policy. So if you change that level of security, you need to inform the insurer. Otherwise, you will have no coverage at all. Maybe just think about a regular exclusion that you have in those policies, which is infrastructure exclusion. So it's not related to COVID-19, but the insurer will never cover a power outage. An issue with the electricity, for instance, or everything related to telecommunication, fiber networks, satellites. Why? Because again, there is a systemic risk for them. And so even you increase your risk because you are more dependent on the infrastructure and the technology, if there is an issue related to that infrastructure, your cyber insurance will not cover your loss of income, for instance. But for the cyber attack, that would work. The general liability, so if someone introduces claims against you because you contaminated his employee or the company or whatever, will work more or less. So it means that if the claims come from a third party, I would say that most of the wording will cover. Even some of them may have exclusion for virus or limitation, but it's not the case for every company. So there is a coverage in some cases for claims from third party, but claims from employees or recourse of the social security that you could find will be much more limited. Why? Because employees are not third party in many cases for the bodily injury or the illness, and the recourse of the social security is often covered for accident, but less for disease. So there is less coverage on that part of the liability. And maybe to finish, let's talk about the directors and officers liability. So your main concern as a director. So as Anne-Sophie explained, you have a lot of duties. So you need to react face to that situation. You need to balance the needs and interests of various stakeholders. So the employees' interests are not the same as the shareholders' interests. You need to take all the appropriate risk management decisions. It's your duty as a director to have an appropriate risk management framework. You will face the downturn, so you need to also to deploy the appropriate technology to support the work from home policy. So that's your liability. And so we will see claims coming on the directors for instance, bodily injury. So if employees or if the third parties are contaminated, they could sue the director saying that they were not able to implement the appropriate measures. You could also see claims coming for discrimination. So if you do not apply the same protection or level of protection of measures for some part of the employees compared to other workers or other part of the employees, they could also sue you for discrimination. The communication during this period is key. Mainly if you are a listed company. There are some claims in the US for claims related to the COVID-19 communication. There are some class actions. The bankruptcy, of course. So if the company goes bankrupt, it could have a liability for the company, mainly if the directors didn't take early enough the decision to stop the activity, continue in accumulating losses. And that's a huge liability. For funds director, of course, if the funds is losing money, you could have claims from investors against the investment managers, but also against the directors, based on a comparison with peers, and that it will be in any cases they will compare with what the peers are doing. And so in those cases, will your insurance policy answer positively? And the answer is yes. In most of the cases, you will get a coverage. Nevertheless, you need to know that there is one major exclusion, which is bodily injury, to have in each and every insurance D&O insurance policy. And so the insurer will never pay, or they will try to avoid to pay the direct consequences of an illness or death due to the virus, for instance. But in Europe, at least, the defense cost will always be covered. For all the other consequences because of bankruptcy or miscommunication and so on will be included. But insurers are expecting a change in the claims and the losses, so they expect huge losses coming, and therefore you see a change in the D&O insurance market. So they already started more than 1 year ago for the large groups and the large corporations, but it's coming now to everybody. So you can expect for the renewal to have to provide information based on your financial assessment, on your risk management policy, on your liquidity position, and so on. And based on this answer and based on the sector where you are working, we could see increase in price, in deductible, the capacity being restricted from 10 million to 5 million with some insurers, but also you could find some additional exclusion, like bankruptcy exclusion, shareholder claims exclusion, COVID-19 exclusion. And so it is for the potential risk for the future, but it's important to know it now. Why? Because D&O insurance policies are claims-made basis. So it means that the policy which will cover is the policy in force when the claims is made. So let's say that you have a claim in 2021, but for a decision that you took in April 2020, so today, that's the policy of 2021 which will play. So it means that if at the renewal on 1st of January, for instance, the insurer put some exclusion, it's useful to think about a notification about any potential future claims and to do it on the existing wording. So that's it for me. So in a conclusion, cyber and D&O policy will provide a good level of comfort. It's less the case for general liability and business interruption. Nevertheless, you could also think about, for the large groups, to use your reinsurance captive or to create a reinsurance captive to cover that kind of risk, at least to structure and finance the risk, and maybe try to find some reinsurer for a part of those risks which are not insured by the traditional insurer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Philippe. We see also now the questions coming in little by little. I have not forgotten Jean-Philippe Peters either. Jean-Philippe, are you back? Can you say hello?
Yeah, I hope so. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Hello?
that's good. So we will just give the opportunity now to Anne-Sophie. There was a question that was raised to her by Anne Kaiser, and the question was about, I think, internal audit, if that can be done remotely. Anne-Sophie, you think that if that can be done?
Yeah, I definitely think it can be done. I even observed that some banks I am assisting have been pretty well organized in terms of keeping the minimum people in the premises, taking care of the dematerialization of things, meaning that there are people scanning clients' order or scanning any incoming documentation on paper. Then it is very important to organize the dispatching. And if you, as internal auditor, have a proper access to the system of your banks, be it the core banking system or the client relationship management systems, you can potentially perform your interviews via Skype, Teams, calls. You can perform your observation and testing using what is documented in the system. So I think internal audit fieldwork can still be operated. It is certainly more challenging than before, but it has to be supported strongly by the board members, because it is your means for you to get the comfort that operational risk is maintained under control, that your company is not exposed to huge risk, be it the risk of non-compliance with MiFID, with AML KYC rules. So you know better than I do the potential sanction, and the CSSF has recently published sections towards banks. So those sections are consequences of on-site inspection occurring months before. But bear in mind that it's important to maintain an eye on some specific areas like governance, compliance. So performing internal audit remotely is highly encouraged, even if it might be more challenging and you may face difficulties ending your internal audit plan for 2020, but reassess the risk areas and keep focus on what makes sense. Interact a lot with your audit committee if you have an audit committee to get guidelines from them, and ensure proper feedback to the audit committee and board members.
Okay, thank you, Anne-Sophie. We have another question for Philippe. Philippe, have you seen the question? What I would like to suggest is that you think about the answer that you want to give, and that you put it in writing, because then we can also already go back to Jean-Philippe for the part on ICAP.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. So, Jean-Philippe, we come back to you. Hope that we will not lose you again. So please tell us about ICAP.
Yeah, thank you, Fernand. And sorry for the disruptions. Actually, that was a good live example of BCP to connect with another plan B, which was the phones. Yes, on the ICAP side, as Thierry mentioned, and as you mentioned in the introduction, there are a lot of similarities with the OSA on the insurance companies. But what we see in terms of process this year, I would first maybe briefly touch a word on how banks have adopted and have adapted the ICAP process this year for the COVID, because the timeline and the deadline were very much concurrent with the explosion of the crisis. You know that banks have to file their ICAP by the end of March to CSSF, and CSSF granted a few extensions for those that requested that to the end of April. So we saw two families of banks. The first ones were filing their ICAP and send that ICAP to CSSF on time. And of course, in those ICAP, you had no COVID impact assessment because it was prepared beforehand. And those that were requesting extension because of operational challenges or other reasons, these banks, some of them have already included some of COVID analysis in their reports, not a full-fledged, of course, but other initial impact assessment there, and others have not done it yet. So for board members listening and attending this meeting, I think it's very important to remind that the current crisis that we face is a typical trigger that you could find in the ICAP or OSA procedures to review and to reconduct an ICAP, even not waiting for the next year. So we would expect those that have not yet included some COVID impact assessment in the ICAP to do it to redo it actually later down the road this year and not wait for next year to do so. And actually we do observe some regulators like ECB already asking quite a bit of questions on the impact of COVID on the risk profile of banks. So what can we expect in terms of the impact? And we have split that in four big blocks. I think that Melanie can show the slide there, where we do have the main blocks or the main type of risk where we saw some impacts being raised by banks. The first one is on the asset side, of course, due to the volatility of the markets. You have your position that can be hardly impacted from a market risk point of view. Of course, in Luxembourg, we do have limited trading book activities overall, so that's maybe not a direct impact that you can see there, but rather I would say an indirect impact because all the collateral value that banks are taking in as a protection for the credit risk has been impacted by this fluctuation of values in collateral. So Lombard lending in private banking or the exposure in derivatives with the collateral moving up or down, given the very high volatility that we observed over the last 2 months, creates exposures, creates new forms of risk, and creates potential business impact as well, because you might have on the fees of private banks impact as well with this very strong reduction of values of collateral and portfolios of the clients. So that's one of the impact that we can see. But I think that for banks, what we would expect as the major impact is obviously on credit risk, where we do have and we do expect a rise in the defaults, a rise in the credit difficulties from clients, and this has to be taken into parallel with the various measures taken by regulators and by the authorities in the various countries in Europe to protect retail or small and medium enterprises, and to put some moratorium on the credit reimbursement. So there, what we observe as a very big challenge for banks nowadays, especially the larger retail banks, is to make sure that they can distinguish between the real defaults, I would say, so the real problem of issues, and the defaults or the late payment of interest that are part of these measures, because those ones should not be considered as defaults. So there is a lot of qualitative and process reprocessing work at the moment to make sure that we can identify and split the population of defaults between those that are subject to the measures and those that are really linked to a real counterparty default. That's a number one things in the process, and that's what we see a lot of banks being actively working on today. And obviously, as a correlation with this, you know that with the IFRS 9 standards, you need to have these impairment measures being quantified and being projected in the profit and loss accounts. And then we do see volatility in this ECL, so in these expected credit losses, that will impact definitely the capital planning of ICAP. So how you expect your P&L to move, how you expect your profit to move over the next 2-3 years in your capital planning. So definitely something that we should be reflecting in the ICAP. If not done yet, should be done sooner. Finally, the model assumptions themselves with the current scenarios and the current unusual and never seen actually kind of situation we are in today will force banks to revisit the assumptions underlying the models. I won't talk about operational resilience a lot because Sophie and Laurent did it already. But obviously, all the measures, all the impact that they summarized earlier in the call will be transposed to some extent in the ICAP, in the explanation, in the scenarios that you would run, for instance, on cyber risk, or in the increase or potential increase of operational incidents. So these will be translated somehow as well in the ICAP. So that's another impact that we can see. And lastly, all these three elements together and the other risks that I've not covered here, and the uncertain macroeconomic outlook on which we are today, creates difficulties to project the business plan of banks. And you know that ICAP is a forward-looking document that should project the profile of the bank and the risk profile of the bank in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And so obviously, as of today, banks are a bit in a gray zone to be able to revisit the business plan and create this projection to take into consideration various new world in which we are in. What and to summarize this slide, what we see as a common trait across all the impacts that we see relates to the scenario analysis, basically, because most of the risk model relies on scenarios, relies on assumptions, and these scenarios are reshaped with the current situation. And these scenarios need to be revisited. It takes a bit of time because you need to have visibility. So that's why if banks on which you are board members are not yet done the exercise, I think that's something that we should expect in the next 3 to 4 months, but not waiting for the next year to do so. I would not expect the banks or the regulators to tolerate a year of delay before revisiting their assumptions and reshaping the capital planning. So to conclude on my last slide, on slide number 8, the challenges with this scenario analysis is to identify what the bank expects the COVID impact on the business to be on the medium term. ICAP is a 3 to 4 years projected planning, so that's a forward-looking element. And to assess the adequacy of your capital over that time, you need to make some assumptions and some business modeling. If you have a business plan, depending on the impact of that crisis on your business, you will have different type of recovery shapes, and I won't enter the details here, but the idea is obviously that banks will need to go through that exercise at one point in time. Today might be a bit still unstable in terms of visibility, as I said, but we do expect banks to engage in that direction, let's say by the end of the summer or early September at the latest, and then come back on that at a later stage. This measurement of the impact of COVID on your profits and the future capital situation of your bank in the next 2 to 3 years is for me the number one challenge for ICAP, if not for this year, because it might be just too late or just short of running the full exercise, but definitely in revisiting this ICAP in the next few months for another update of the ICAP. So that's a bit in a nutshell. I wanted to stick to the timing. I hope that I can answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Philippe, for being very short. I'm aware that it is not easy to cover such a complex issue. Well, that applies to all the speakers. I forced you to be really very, very short, which is a bit of a pity, but this is also, the intention is to give a flavor to the participants on what the issues could be and not go into the detail. We have no questions in the chat anymore, but we had questions that were raised beforehand. And I have them here in front of me. I will read them out. And I know that Anne-Sophie volunteered to answer also a few of them. So the first question is stipulated as follows. Up to how long are insurance entities permitted to hold board meetings by phone or video link? I think the answer is in the Règlement Grand Ducal dated 20th of March. I guess that you all remember that the Parliament has declared Luxembourg in a state of crisis, which means that they gave power to the government to run the country without legislating. And in this particular Règlement Grand Ducal, which by the way is also published on the website of ILA, it says that the General Assemblies, but also board meetings can now be run virtually by video conference, by phone. And this Règlement Grand Ducal lasts until the state of crisis will be terminated. And the answer is nobody knows when that will be the case. For now, the Parliament has given this power to the government for 3 months, so that would run until the 18th of June, but nobody knows if that will be continued later on or not. So I think the answer is until the 18th of June, but maybe longer. This being said, many articles of associations of companies also authorized to hold board meetings by video conference or by phone, so that needs to be checked also. Then the second question, should all board minutes reflect and minute the fact that the board is holding the meeting by phone? Anne-Sophie, you kindly volunteered to answer that one.
Yeah, I think it is quite an easy one. So volunteering was not to require me a lot of courage. Yes, of course, you have to mention that the meeting is held by phone or video conference. Bear in mind that you are still allowed to do the board meeting physically as soon as you respect distanciation sociale. So if you have quite a big conference room for a board room, and you can afford having at least 2 meters between each board members. Nothing today forbidden you to do your board meeting physically if you want. So I encourage you to specify effectively those days, whether it was a physical board or a board held via conference call or video conference. So yes, the mean for holding the meeting is important to be mentioned.
Okay. Then are tax authorities flexible if the board member was not physically present? Well, that links to the question number one. Well, it depends, of course, of which tax authorities we are talking about. I think that the Luxembourg tax authorities, they would obviously also stick to the Règlement Grand Ducal I just mentioned. But when we talk about foreign tax authorities, well, they have their own rules, so that needs to be checked. And then the last question, all boards have to assess the impact of COVID-19 on their business, and they have to document this. Anne-Sophie, well, we talked already about ICAP ORSA, which is part of this exercise. But I think it would be good if boards now discuss and document that they have started the thought process about COVID-19. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, I agree on that. And as I stated before, I even encourage extraordinary board meetings. So if you have already approved the annual account, so if your normal board for the first quarter or for Q2 occurred, I encourage you to call for an extraordinary board meeting to ensure that you document this discussion with the management of the entities you are overseeing.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have no further questions, which brings us to the end of this session already. Many thanks to Jean-Philippe, Thierry, Laurent, Anne-Sophie, and Philippe for this timely discussion. I think we had a couple of valuable insights into how directors and boards can help to step up their leadership roles during these challenging times. ILA will post this webinar shortly, and there will also be a summary of the discussions during the next days. Thank you to the participants. Thank you for listening to us. Next week, ILA will continuing with a new e-chat, which will be on board effectiveness and organization in a crisis. That will be moderated by Monique Bachner, who I think is in the audience also today. And so if you have more questions, don't hesitate to send them to Melanie at ELA, and we will be happy to come back to you if we have the answer. Thank you very much. Have a nice day and stay safe. Bye-bye.